Cheers everyone, and welcome once again to another year-end wrap-up here on Fulton's Music Reviews. It's so hard to believe that just 1 year ago we were doing these top list videos, and so much has happened in 2013, and so much great music has been released this year as well. This is always a very anticipated time of year, not only for myself personally and for this channel, but also for everyone else, for we all get together at this time and talk about some of our favorite music of the year. And I feel that this year especially there's going to be quite a lot of diversity. A lot of people know me as a metal guy, a lot of people know me as a prog guy, and last year I kind of did differing lists, their own separate lists last year. Various numbers, of course, but they had their own separate lists, but this time it's going to be all cross-genres in one list altogether. This is going to be a two-part video series, with this one being numbers 30 through 16, and the second part being numbers 15 through number 1. Very exciting, and also, just please keep in mind that this is a personal list of mine. If something that you like didn't make it onto this list, please do not take it personally. I'm only one person, I can only listen to so much. But let's waste no more time with this and get into the top 30. So let's start off with number 30 through 16. Let's take a look. Alright, so kicking off the list at number 30, we have an album that almost didn't even make the list in the first place, but I knew in terms of its history, in terms of the feeling that I got from buying it, and in terms from the music in general, causing a groundbreaking experience in terms of history as well as music history. In 2013, Black Sabbath with 13. Just an honest record, genuine, a band that made this album for them, and a band that sounds like they never lost any of the old talent that they had back in the 70s. A lot of long songs, lots of jamming. Tony Iommi still shows that he's got the licks, and Ozzy sounds absolutely amazing. Geezer's thumping away at the bass. Is Bill Ward missing a little bit, but still sounds like Black Sabbath. Always Black Sabbath, and a good way to kick off this list at number 30. Coming in at number 29 is an album that kind of took me by surprise. A rather new band, and I feel that a lot of people are going to learn about this through this video. Nero DeMarte. They are a very dense, atmospheric metal band, but the vocals have a little bit more of a range to them. The music, instrumentally, very dissonant, very technical, but also has that progressive melodic edge to it. Almost reminded me a lot of the Carnival release that came out earlier this year, but a little bit more metalized and a little bit more progressive. So check it out if you haven't already. Nero DeMarte with Nero DeMarte. Coming in at number 28 is a release that's not too far away from the last one I just mentioned. At 28, we have the almighty Gorguts with Colored Sands. As I wanted to say in a review of this that didn't actually get up, I am a huge fan of Kev Hufnagel and Colin Marson, who play in a band called Dysrhythmia, who I did talk about last year. They have been influenced by Gorguts for years and years, and when Luc Lemay had invited them into the band, I knew it could have been a match made in heaven. In theory, but in practice, my God, did they deliver a masterpiece of an album. I feel like the old school Gorguts fans really aren't digging this all too much. Maybe it's a little bit too out there, maybe it's a little bit too progressive, and maybe it's a little bit too mellow. But I feel that in terms of an album and in terms of a legacy that they want to leave behind, Colored Sands is an album to check out. And it's one that really pushes the boundaries of your mental listening capacity. So if you're into this really dense wall of sound with technical playing and really whacked out solos and song arrangements, give Gorguts a try. You might actually like it. Number 28, Gorguts, Colored Sands. Coming in at number 27, we have a band that I got to see earlier this year, right after this album came out. Again, not too far away from the last album we just talked about. We have Intronaut with Habitual Levitations, Instilling Words with Tones, signed by Sasha himself. Really great album. One that didn't exactly hit me right away. The arrangements as well as just the sound that they were going for in this album really kind of took me off guard at first. It was a little bit too raw. And even the production seemed a little bit thinner, but once I got to really mold with it, it really came alive. And in terms of prehistoricisms, I think this might actually be my favorite album from Intronaut. It took a while, but man, does this have a lot to unlock musically. Really great band if you're into really dense, atmospheric, progressive rock. Not too heavy, even though it just have some harsh vocals. I think that any fan of progressive metal could get into this. So check it out. Intronaut, Habitual Levitations, number 27. Moving on to something a little bit more metal, a little bit more progressive, a little bit more chaotic. Alright, a lot chaotic. Number 26, we have the almighty Dillinger Escape Plan with One of Us is the Killer. Got to see this band at the New England Metal and Hardcore Fest before this album came out. Fuck almighty, did they put on one hell of a performance, but when this album came out, they proved that they are one force not to reckon with. Albeit this album is a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more jazzy, and a little bit more progressive, and dare I say mellower, they still prove to be one of the hardest hitting bands in music history, and the bombastic energy that they are able to bring forward onto tape as well onto a stage is unmatched. And there is only one Dillinger Escape Plan. If you're looking for an accessible Dillinger album, if you haven't heard of them already, or if you've always wanted to listen to them, you never knew what album to check out this new one. At number 26, One of Us is the Killer, Dillinger Escape Plan. Coming in at number 25 is an album that a lot of people are going to think, why is it so low? I mean, this is going to make it to a lot of people's top 10. Some even might put this at number 1 on their list. To me personally, it did not resonate that much with me, but it is still lucky enough to be on here. And it's making its way up the top 30, so a lot of great things to say about this one. You're going to know it as soon as you see the color of this album. So, number 25, we have Death Heaven with Sunbather. Now, this is an album that either gets talked about in terms of the color of this packaging alone, or the very major sounding black metal that resides inside. Very emotionally connecting black metal. That's one of the only ways I can really describe this band. It's happy sounding, but it's raw as fuck. And it's got these post-rock moments that, in a way, remind you of bands like Explosion in the Sky and Godspeed You Black Emperor, but it always wants to go back to those black metal roots. And if you're a fan of Liturgy, you would kind of understand what I'm talking about by the sound that this band has. But to me personally, I like this band a little bit more than Liturgy. They have a little bit more to offer, a little bit more diversity, and have a little bit of a better craft of an album. So I feel like a lot of you have heard this album already, but if you're a black metal fan, you have an open mind toward the entire genre of that, and you want something a little bit more melodic, Sunbather, it's the album for you. Number 25. Coming in at number 24 is an album that is going to start one of the possible many strings of controversy that may reside in certain albums on the top list. But again, my personal list, and I'd love to hear your commentary, especially on this particular album. Coming in at number 24, we have Ishaan with, try to say this right, Das Seelenbrechen. Comes from Nietzsche, it's German, but regardless of what the name means, this is a strange album. Forming a solo career, doing more of a progressive metal, we've always heard this avant-garde influence in his music, even back to the early days of Emperor. We always kind of anticipated this train would hit the station eventually, and boy did it ever with this one. But in a puzzling way. It's done extremely well, but it just sounds off, especially since this is a guy that comes from more of a black metal background, and doing something that represents freeform jazz with clean vocals doesn't exactly sound like something that would work for something like this. But the rawness is so obvious in that it sounds like there's a madman going insane, and this is his last testimony. it really sounds like a genuine recording. Not quite sure what Ishaan was going through at this time, but it really feels like this was an album that he needed to get some emotions out with, and it's terrifying at times that it's also beautiful. If you have an open mind, I'd go into this one just carefully. Number 24, Desolation, Ishaan. And coming in at number 23, we have another beautifully dark, nightmarish album, but one that hit it straight out of the park. This is one that's going to make it very high on a lot of people's lists, I know, but to me, it didn't quite make it to number 1, but we're going to talk about it now. At number 23, we have Altar of Plagues with Teeth, Glory, and Injury. Now, this is an album that didn't quite hit me right away, and I feel a lot of people are going to say this, that as soon as they really started to listen to it more and hear a little bit more of the nuances of what went into this, it really hit them where emotionally they could love it. But in terms of looking at it as an outsider, they almost fear it as well. One that you don't find very often, and they made the blend work, especially in a shorter format. This is a band that usually does longer string pieces, but they really shortened up their game on this one and created a really great album. Altar of Plagues, Teeth, Glory, and Injury, number 23. And talking about beautiful darkness, we have a band that almost has that in its title. Don't want to give it away, but this is an album we're going to want to talk about. At number 22, we have the legendary Dark Tranquility with Construct. Love that album art too, by the way. With this album, I feel a lot of people were disappointed at first because it really wasn't as hard-hitting as they were expecting it to be, and it really had more of an atmosphere and a moodiness to it as opposed to a straight melodic death metal album. Either way, I think this is a very diverse album, and an album that was a good risk for this band to take, especially this late in their career. Again, it does have all the elements that make them Dark Tranquility, but also it did kind of push the boundaries, and also kind of added a less is more effect as well. It wasn't for everyone, but for me, I really grew to love this album. Number 22, Construct by Dark Tranquility. Moving on to some really beautiful, dark, and at times uplifting melodic death metal. A band that I discovered this year strictly from a music video that I had seen. Number 21, we have Omnium Gatherum with Beyond. Now, that music video was for the song The Unknowing, which is absolutely beautiful. Loved the melodies in that, loved the emotion that came out through the lyrics as well as the song itself. This is one that was one of the best melodic death metal albums of the year for sure. Very beautiful and atmospheric. Some ambience, but really more clean guitars than anything else. But the melodies are just absolutely catchy, they're beautiful, they're memorable, and the vocals, although they're a little bit trollish and kind of more guttural in the traditional melodic death metal, it really fit. And it added a uniqueness as well that I had never heard before in melodic death metal, so gotta give this a huge thumbs up. Omnium Gatherum with Beyond, number 21. And coming in at number 20, moving on to a little bit more of progressive territory for a little while, we have UK Pragers at number 20, Tesseract with Altered State. And that is just such a cool cover. You know, simple is best, and a lot of what they do musically is very, very simple, but just complexly arranged. This isn't a band that's dressed with solos, although they are a progressive metal band. It's a band that's more based on groove, and they took a chance with this album. With a new vocalist, I was a little bit skeptical of how this band could evolve and move forward, given that this album is completely all clean sung, even with falsettos. I think they really did a great job with this. Not sure if I love it as much as their first full-length one, but definitely one that puts you into an altered state, especially if you really pay attention to what they're doing. It's definitely one that if you're into some really great musicianship with some really great groove and something that's not too flashy, Tesseract, Altered State, number 20. Moving even more forward into progressive land, even into fusion land, At number 19, we have a solo album from Mr. Evan Brewer of The Faceless called Your Itinerary. This is his second studio album and his first album as a full band. The avant-garde influences are dime a dozen, and the arrangements are just sometimes completely out of left field. But in a good way. This is one that I can definitely tell Evan spent a long time crafting, and musically as well as visually. As an instrumental album, this has some great cover art, and just the images that you see in your head, you feel like you're just driving down the road with just the radio completely on shuffle. You're in a different place, you hear kind of a different style of music. That's kind of the vibe that I get. It's just a musical adventure, even though it's really not that long of an album. It's musically dense, but it's not one that's really going to take much out of your day to listen to it. One I highly recommend to any bass player. Take notes from this, guys. Fuck, man. And at number 19, definitely worthy of the spot, Evan Brewer with Your Itinerary. Moving even further into progressive fusion, this time with lots of guitars, we have at number 18, Exevious with Liminal. Love that cover art. And if you haven't heard of Exevious, this is Timon from the previous Cynic lineup. And musically, it does sound a lot like Cynic. You know, if you always wanted more solos in Cynic and for some reason wanted Cynic to be all instrumental, well, Exevious is for you. This is something to really just sit and marvel at in terms of the guitar work, but in terms of the compositions as well. Musical landscapes is one way to describe it, but it's more of a neural landscape in the brain. It's more, you know, psychological than it is visual, and probably a lot of people get high and listen to this. I'm sure they pretty much embrace that, but you know, what are you going to do? This is very dense music and one for the guitar players of the world to check out if you're into that kind of stuff. Number 18, Exevious with Liminal. And coming down to the last two, here at number 17, if you're a guitar player, you should know this gentleman already. At number 17, Mr. Joe Satriani with Unstoppable Momentum. Now this is an album I did a text review of on my Facebook page, and pretty much the title says it all. Unstoppable Momentum is definitely a good metaphor to describe Joe. You know, he's always coming up with new ideas to make the song sound alien, and guitar techniques that make any guitar player cry and weep for months because they want to learn it. But he uses those techniques to write songs that are very, very unique, and they know how to paint those right pictures in your head. And with Unstoppable Momentum, you can hear him getting a little bit older and approaching a little bit of a bluesy background and almost going back in time while moving forward with this album. But this is no slouch of an album. This is one for, you know, a lot of the old rockers, a lot of the old blues guitar players of the world, but even one that's forward-thinking and one for any guitar player to still learn from, even in 2013. So coming at you, at number 17, Mr. Satch himself, Unstoppable Momentum. And closing out part one of this top 30, as my stack in front of me is growing and growing. Number 16, we have a very unique combination of individuals. This is the Levin, Miniman, and Rudis project, titled LMR. And I feel like this was something that was really a surprise to a lot of people. You know, as a forum follower, I knew that this album was going to happen. And especially, we know that Marco had auditioned to be in Dream Theater. I feel like there was always that connection between the three of them. And, you know, a lot of people who didn't hear about this beforehand are going to think, oh, is this the next run of LTE? Musically, it's very similar. In terms of the band, though, not so much. This is probably a little bit more similar to the Liquid Trio experiment, but maybe a little bit less improvisational. This is definitely a little bit more structured, and a lot of great influence from Marco also on guitar for some of these songs. Again, there's not too much guitar, it's strictly almost a trio primarily on this album, but this is definitely one that pretty much came out of the woodwork, and I don't think this is ever going to be a touring band. I think this is just possibly a one-off album, but definitely want to check out. And definitely want to close off this list at number 16, closing part 1 of 2 on this top 30 list. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sticking with me this far. And if you're looking forward to the top 15, I can understand why. Look forward to that, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone.